What's the role of the nonprofit sector in fighting systematic racism? How can leaders support Black and Brown staff? This is an important conversation all leaders need to be a part of, which is why I invited a special guest to join us for this episode. Kia Kroom is an experienced fundraising executive with over 20 years of experience. To date, she's raised close to $400 million for nonprofits of all sizes and varieties. She's worked in a host of development roles and is very passionate about racial justice in philanthropy. If you want to be a force for racial justice, but are still learning, like so many of us, this episode is for you. We're glad you're here.
Welcome to the Nothing But Major Gifts podcast from Veritas Group, featuring Richard Perry and Jeff Schreifels. Twice a month, we bring you the latest and best thinking about major gift fundraising, so you can develop authentic relationships with your major donors. Here are your hosts, Richard and Jeff.
Welcome to the podcast today. I'm Jeff Schreifels. Richard is off today, but I have Karen Kendrick on with me, plus a special guest, Kia Kroom. A few months ago, we got an email from a subscriber recommending that we check out what Kia was doing. We did, and we've been big fans of hers ever since. Now, before we get started, let me give you a quick introduction to Kia. Kia has been engaged in the nonprofit sector for 2 decades now and has done incredible work through positions at nonprofits serving people and communities of color across the nation, raising nearly $400 million in support of these causes. Woo! That's a lot.
That's impressive.
In her spare time, I don't know how she has spare time, but in her spare time, you can find Kia publishing new episodes of the Black Fundraisers podcast to celebrate, inspire, and equip Black nonprofit professionals to become nonprofit executives. Welcome, Kia.
Oh my goodness, I'm so thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me, Jeff and Karen.
Yes, Kia, thanks so much for the work you're doing. It's incredible. And I know you've recently started shifting your career focus, especially in the aftermath of the George Floyd murder 2 years ago. Can you share more about your career shift?
Yeah, I kind of hit an inflection point personally and professionally. And I took particular interest in working with Black-led organizations and BIPOC-led organizations. I've been doing a fair amount of research around the funding disparities that people of color-led nonprofits contend with. And I thought, I want to do something about that. So I have created a couple of platforms and vehicles really designed to inspire and equip the Black community, right? My tribe, but Black and Brown communities in building their fundraising capacity. And that is my part of my work and my passion. I believe that in elevating and equitably funding people of color-led organizations that are on the front lines, responding to inequity through their organizations, missions, and movements, they're doing really meaningful work. So if we as society support and further that work, then communities of color will be in a much better position than they are.
That's awesome. Thank you for doing that work. Okay, I have a question. What would you want fundraising leaders really to understand about DEI?
Yes, there's been so much talk about DE&I over the last 24 months.
Yeah.
And I think it's important for fundraising leaders to know that DE&I shouldn't start and end with hiring fundraisers of color. While I celebrate that, organizations are wanting to be more intentional about increasing diversity within their fundraising teams, leaders must be deliberate about creating the equitable and inclusive client needed where fundraisers of color can thrive, enjoy a sense of belonging, and feel valued.
Yeah.
I think that's important. And fundraisers of color, people of color in general inside these organizations must have voice, must have agency in decision making. And we really need to feel as though our ideals are welcomed and celebrated and see them adopted. Otherwise, these leaders must understand that simply diversifying their team, adding a Black person or a brown person to their team, without creating that inclusive and equitable client, are just simply perpetuating diversity management and checking off a box.
Yeah.
And, Jeff, that results in folks feeling tokenized, devalued, unseen, and unheard.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
And, I want to allow you to react
Yeah.
to that, if you would.
Yeah. So Kia, what I hear you saying is, there's this rush to, I have an all white staff, so I need to diversify, and not really looking at what is it about my culture and climate that it creates a place of belonging and welcoming, and that really works. But I think a lot of leaders don't understand what's not working. So could you explain a little bit about what is the experience for Black fundraisers in nonprofits that's creating environments that aren't working, that aren't helping retain them and really help them thrive in those environments?
Yeah, it's what I'm hearing from the Black fundraisers and even brown folks in my community is that they don't enjoy a sense of lived inclusion, meaning they aren't feeling heard. Their ideas and contributions aren't being considered. They aren't having any agency in policies and practices, that inform key aspects of the organization. Or if we want to talk about, fundraising performance, even inform our fundraising strategies, right? Even inform our methods and tactics of doing things. It's like, I'm a part of this team, right? But I don't have any real voice or contribution. And the result is, folks are exhausted. Folks feel as though they're working against the grain and against the current. And frankly, it's exhausting. And we're seeing folks leave as a result of that. Mm-hmm. If you'll indulge me, I've got a super quick story I'd like to share, just a little nuance. While working as a mid-level fundraiser, I was in an ideation discussion with a private foundation prospect, and my white male supervisor, who was, for intents and purposes, the head of our fundraising team.
Yeah.
And, I'm in this meeting, he's in this meeting, representation from that foundation prospect is in the meeting, and my supervisor did all the talking. Right? Mm-hmm. The whole time. And this was the norm for him. And I got kind of used to that for a short period, because folks know I tend to have a lot to say, but this was the norm, And he introduced me, he simply pointed to me and shared my name and title, but he never allowed me to get a word in edgewise, to my discomfort and to the discomfort of the foundation staffers, to the extent that after the meeting concluded, one approached me and he was visibly a little uncomfortable or dismayed. And he quietly shared with me, I would have really appreciated hearing from you. I would have appreciated that.
So what I'm hearing you saying is, there's a lot to be looking at, right? In our systems of fundraising, how we're talking to donors, how we're having people at the table, what needs to change in our systems. And then we're hiring diverse fundraisers, but not including them in helping us change that, see that, understand that at all. And that must be extremely frustrating and exhausting to be living in that every day.
Oh, yeah, to be living that every day. And, if I could just quickly add, Karen, I shared that little short story to suggest how even the philanthropies that we work with, and I would even say private donors, individuals, have an appetite, a healthy appetite for diversity of thought and diversity of voice. And they're wanting to hear from those diverse voices. They're wanting to get to know and experience the Black and brown staffers. So I would challenge fundraising leaders to really begin to embrace and operationalize DE&I by ensuring that their employees of color have agency, have voice, and that the organization is amplifying their voices, which will likely resonate with their constituents.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think is, I mean, I'm going to get back to in a minute to how do leaders do that, but just to step back a minute, like, what do you think is the impact on nonprofits to not have that diverse voice at the table?
Yeah, the impact is, folks are experiencing exhaustion, they're experiencing burnout, and they are leaving. They're leaving jobs, their roles, and some are even leaving the sector as a whole, right? Whether they leave to go into another industry or whether they're leaving to go into business for themselves. I'm talking to Black women every day. Spoke to one yesterday who has gone into business for herself. And Jeff, Karen, you know the lay of the land. You know that recruiters are combing, leaving no stone unturned for great fundraisers, right?
Exactly.
So these women and men are making a decision. You know what? Nope. I don't want to work in that environment. I'm going to try my hand at entrepreneurship and maintain some degree of psychological safety for myself because I'm not being afforded that in these environments.
Yeah.
So in a time when we need more creative and innovative ideas than ever, we're actually stifling all the possible diverse voices and creativity and possibility for our organizations in so many ways.
Absolutely. And if I could just share a couple of really quick data points with you all.
Yeah.
I mean, I had the CEO of the African American Development Officers on the podcast maybe 8 months ago. And, we dove into the AFP's 2021 assessment of inclusion, diversity, and equity survey, which indicated that 60% of Black survey respondents reported having left a workplace due to harassment, due to unconscious bias, or discrimination.
60%.
60%.
Okay.
Wow.
That's not good.
52% said that they believed that they worked much harder than their non-Black peers to receive equal treatment. And I would argue that they didn't necessarily believe that it was equitable, but acknowledged that they worked twice as hard in some cases. And one more data point I want to drop here that came out of that research was that 6 in 10, that's 56%, of respondents who have felt discrimination or have experienced discrimination believed it was based on their appearance and reported having left because they felt isolated and they felt unwelcomed.
Mm-hmm.
Oh. Here's what I'm hearing as a white male. And if I'm a white male nonprofit leader, I'm hearing, hey, it's great that you want to have a more diverse staff, but it's not just about hiring people. And as you said, checking off a box. It is going to mean hard work on your part. It's going to mean looking at yourself. What are some things inside of yourself that are biasing you to not allow people who are different than you to take leadership roles or to let them speak and meet, so that's some personal stuff you got to work on. But then also within the organization, how are we going to make this organization a place that lets people, brown and Black people, thrive here?
Absolutely.
And that is going to take a lot of work. And it's not something that can just easily, it's not something that can be handled just by hiring people.
Correct. There's work that has to be done, and there must be a commitment to creating strong norms around inclusion. What do I mean by that? Norms that prohibit inhibiting behaviors such as, someone talking over a person when they're speaking, right? We refer to that as a microaggression. We saw that happen to, SCOTUS Ketanji Brown Jackson, right? Being talked over or browbeating. There are Black women and there are Black men and brown and women and men alike and other groups. This isn't just limited to, race, right? Although we know that race is the elephant in the room, but even other social groups. When we see those kinds of behaviors happening, there must be strong norms that prohibit that. And there are organizations that have ratified policies against zero tolerance for interrupting folks, right? Keeping yourselves on mute until a person is done talking and giving them white space, right? For example, there are organizations that make it a point to, when in a meeting, go around and call people out by name to ask if they have something to say or to contribute, or, has everyone's voice been heard, right? Karen, are you okay? What's your reaction? Is there anything we need to know? Jeff, what's your reaction? We haven't heard from you and we very much want your perspective. What can you tell us regarding this? Ensuring that voices are heard and that people are supported and that they're enjoying psychological safety to show up.
Yeah.
So then if I do speak up, what creates psychological safety or doesn't, Kia?
So there's a lot of research that suggest that leaders must lean into driving down status, right? If you're a leader and you're used to talking first and speaking out first, maybe you consider speaking last, right? Because perhaps there's something that you might say unknowingly that might inhibit, right, or prompt a person to self-censor themselves. So, leaders might consider ways to drive down status, right? Even if it means opting out of some discussions with your team members, allowing them to have a discussion, a frank and candid discussion about a topic and, report out what the feedback was without necessarily pointing that to an individual, unless those individuals are comfortable, identifying themselves and, staking claim to what they reported out. And I'm just going to keep this real simple, just being people. Right. And being curious about one another and taking in that individuating information that you only get from a counterpart or from a subordinate. When you engage them, those conversations that happen before the meeting, when you talk about your weekend and, Jeff, you and I have talked about how I leverage, my podcast. I talk a lot about cooking and, and,
a lot.
right. The foods that I prepare. Research shows that when we do that, when we have those informal opportunities and we learn about one another's backgrounds, we learn that, we have differences, but we also learn that we have some similarities and shared humanity. And that breaks down some of those walls and drives down that status and helps people to feel more comfortable and as though they belong. Does that help make sense?
Very
Definitely.
much.
Definitely.
Yeah. So what do we say? What would you say to leaders right now? What do they need to do now so that they continue to make that long-term commitment to support Black and brown staff? What do you say to them?
Sure. I want to tell the leaders it's really pivotal that they work to create that inclusive and equitable workplace climate where their Black and brown employees experience lived inclusion and belonging, where they enjoy that psychological safety to express themselves, to express their perspectives. And folks are smarter than the average bear. I mean, these efforts, these leaders must know the efforts can't be so insular and, limited to their team. Like you can be, a woke VP of advancement or chief development officer, and you can model inclusion within a team. But if it's not happening in other divisions across the organization, folks are going to know, right?
Yeah.
The organization as a whole must commit to being inclusive. So these leaders got to be talking to their CEO, their colleagues at the executive level, their board, and ratifying policies and practices that, again, I've said this, that are creating strong norms around inclusion. This way, employees aren't having one-off experiences within their team, but across the entire organization.
Yeah, it's the good work. That's the tough, good work that needs to happen.
Absolutely. And I would add, Jeff, that, leaders must be looking at every opportunity to incorporate the voices of their Black and brown employees when key decisions are being made. And they should be paying a close attention to what these employees are saying, but also what are they not saying? Right? What are they not communicating? What prompts that awkward silence? And get curious and drill down on that. And I'm certain they'll get some of the answers they need.
So Kia, if I'm a leader, I should probably just have an assumption that my environment is going to have bias and blind spots and places where we're not seeing and hearing. And so would you recommend I come to you if I've hired you and say, Kia, we're learning, we got work to do, please come talk to me. I'm going to be checking in with you regularly. How are you doing? How's the environment working? Are you feeling heard? What do we need to change? Is that a good thing to do as a leader to become more of an ally or an accomplice to Black fundraisers?
Sure. I have a complex response to that. Yes, I think that it's great as a leader to do that, to practice that, emotional IQ, to lean in and have those kinds of conversations with your Black and brown employees. However, I don't believe leaders should be expecting or leaning on their Black employees to be the fix, to create the resolution, because I'm going to tell you, it's hard enough living this, right? And then being put in a position where you're expected to solve it. A lot of my brothers and sisters are like, you know what? I've been telling them that this hasn't been working. And now suddenly, you want me to be a part of it, a solution. But by then, this individual has disinvested and, has endured the racial trauma and, just really aren't invested. They're in an orientation of just surviving and not thriving. So I would challenge leaders to, it's great to check in with your employees, but, looking this thing in the face that we call white supremacy and we call racism in the workplace, there are professionals and consultants that are doing this work. Don't look inwardly and expect your employees of color to, just bare their souls and engineer a solution for this, right? Because it's a much bigger undertaking than that. And quite frankly, the day-to-day, we are fatigued because we're in this fight every day.
Yeah.
So what I hear you saying, Kia, is yes, say, I want to know, I want to hear, ask questions. But then when you're doing the work of diversity training or systems change, make sure you're getting that outside consultant who wants to be in there, wants to be telling their story, they're stepping in to help people make those shifts and changes versus putting additional stress on your internal folks who are already experiencing it to step up and be in that place. So that's really helpful input.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. I want to speak to something you said because you used the word that's really important to me when you said accomplice, right? We've heard a great deal about the need for white allies, right? Those white allies that show up and show their support for people of color, right? Black and brown folks. Yeah. I'm a proponent of accomplices. And I know when you hear the word accomplice, it's right. You can laugh. It's a little jarring because
it's a little edgy. Yeah,
it's a little edgy. And the first thing you think of is, like a conspirator or accomplice to a crime, right?
Yeah, right.
Right. But here's the deal: we've seen evidence that racism can rise to the level of criminal activity. And even mean life or death for Black and brown folks, right? Just indulge me for a minute. So I distinguish allies from accomplices by way of their actions. When talking about anti-Black racism, our allies may be woke. They know what anti-Black racism looks like, right? They've read about it, or they feel they do. They've read about it. They know people that are experiencing it and are comfortable calling it out. We need accomplices that are willing to go a couple of steps further, lean in, and put their privileges, their voices, and bodies on the line to attack the structural inequity that is at the root of it, right? I'll give you an example. I have a good girlfriend, Dr. Alana Simmons. I mean, she's out of this world. She describes the function of an accomplice as this. She says, if you see two dogs fighting on the street, the ally sees the dogs fighting and is outraged and calls for help. But the accomplice is going to intervene, break up the fight, and call the dogs to attention, right? You might say, Karen, or you might say, Jeff, or somebody might say, well, that's risky business. You got two dogs fighting, somebody could get bit, snarl, whatever the case may be. Yeah, there's a risk in, being an accomplice, but there's a risk in not being an accomplice, right? There's a risk either way it goes. So it's really important. And Jeff, the last thing I want to say to this, and I'd love for you to react, is that, the white male is the ideal accomplice, right? When we talk about anti-Blackness, white supremacy, white supremacist work culture, and professional standards, there are Black men and women experiencing pressure to assimilate into white supremacist work cultures, and are being told that their braids, their hair, their locks, etc., are not professional, or maybe they look like me and have half a shaved head with razor lines and a nose piercing, right? But
Right.
they're right, but they're degreed up and have incredible experience. We're being told our nail colors are distracting or that we dress colorfully. And I mentioned the white male accomplice, Jeff, because the white male can effectively subvert that white supremacist culture and those white supremacist professional standards by normalizing inclusion.
Exactly. You're exactly right.
Right? So that Black men and women are encouraged to show up as their authentic selves. And there are really simple ways to do that, right? Like just elevating the persona, the voices and profiles of Black and brown employees in your fundraising appeals and your letter that goes out. When you've got that picture on the bottom from that major gifts officer who's got locks or braids and
Right.
Who wears their Ankara peplum like I wear mine, you're sending a message to your constituents to see these employees and their color, their splendor, their swag.
Yes.
And that's the professional standard.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. You know what I hear you say is white men got us into this and white men can get us out.
Let the church say amen. It's gonna take some white male, white males to challenge that culture and that patriarchy that is marginalizing people of color in these environments in society. It's gonna take, the white man owning and being aligned in this fight, right? That's exactly what I'm saying.
Well, I can tell you, like, this white man is on a journey as well. And it was actually you that really brought something to light back when COVID first started. We put together at Veritas very quickly some training, and we wanted to get it out to as many people. So we said, hey, anything you can afford for this training, go ahead. And it was all about COVID. And you were part of that. You took part of that, but you left in the middle of it. And you wrote to us telling us why and called us out. I want you to tell that story a little bit. And then I want to talk about what we've been doing since then.
Sure, happy to share. You're absolutely right. I was participating in that major gift officers training during COVID. And let me just say this really quickly. I've been following Veritas for years and prior to COVID, and utilizing your best practices for cultivating major gift prospects and even stewarding, my existing donors. And I have seen phenomenal results. I mean, I swear by the curriculum. But I remember participating in the cohort with another Black female fundraising colleague. And when George Floyd was murdered, I, like many Black employees, were profoundly hurt, grief-stricken. I was still reeling from the murder of Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and it's like now George Floyd so publicly. I'm sure you're aware, there were conversations happening in Zoom squares across the country, giving employees, Black and otherwise, an opportunity to debrief about the events, the protests that were going on globally, and the elephant in the room of white supremacy and racism. So I was honestly dismayed and disheartened when there was no discussion of the events in the training. There was a lot of talk about COVID, and in all honesty, I felt, as did my colleague, my Black female colleague, that it was a little tone deaf on Veritas' part not to address the events, especially given the fact that you had Black participants, and I believe there was at least one Black staffer on the team. I remember wondering, if she felt like she must have felt how we felt as Black women and experienced pressure to smile and grin and bear what was going on and act as though it were just normal business while grieving and coping over this very public murder, in silence. So consequently, I stopped participating in the training, as did my colleague.
Yeah. Yeah, you are absolutely right. We should have said something. And it was a moment of clarity, realizing, what, obviously we also were, in pain about the George Floyd murder as well, but we didn't say anything, or we didn't know what to say. And it really caused me to think and go deep inside myself. And I would consider myself this, white male progressive, who's an ally. But I think that whole experience started taking me down a path of trying to become an accomplice, from going from ally to accomplice, because it was like, well, what am I doing? What are we doing at Veritas to change this? Mm-hmm. And I personally know we're on a podcast here, but it was a podcast that really started launching me into thinking beyond equality issues to equity issues, was that podcast, Seeing White. Mm-hmm. And that podcast was powerful. And it put a mirror up to my face as a white person, that I don't even see this because of my whiteness, all the things that are going on, that the privilege that I experience because of who I am as a white man, and seeing that privilege and wondering, how can we move beyond, how do I as a white male move beyond just accepting this and just moving through life, and wanting to do something to, what can we do at Veritas to try to create equity for our brown and black brothers and sisters that we haven't been doing. And so we've been on this journey at Veritas. We've and we're making mistakes, and it's going to take time and effort. But I feel like we have a vision for where we want to go as a company, in trying to go from the ally to an accomplice. But we need help. And I mean, having you here today is part of that journey, helping us learn about this and get that message out to the audience as well.
Yeah, I celebrate that. I think that that's important. And I can appreciate, as someone who has been, a customer to Veritas, I can appreciate your vulnerability and transparency about your journey, and, that you're really embracing, like, okay, that role of that accomplice. Mm-hmm. I can celebrate and appreciate that. And I think that, I can say, this is complicated stuff. And my community, I would argue that the Black and brown community, acknowledges that this isn't easy stuff, right? And that, not everybody is gonna, get it right. And that folks have honest, questions, right, about ways that they can show up and things that they can do to address the issue, the structural inequities, right? And as long as it's authentic, it's coming from a place of authenticity, as long as you're committed to that, in that journey of, creating a more inclusive and equitable programming and curriculum and climate internally. I think you're taking steps in the right direction. And I can appreciate that. And I'm certain that, these communities will as well. It'll show, through what you do.
Mhm. Gosh, I feel like we could go on for hours and just keep, I mean, it would be really fun if we were at your house having a meal and we continue the podcast.
Some of that incredible cooking.
Yes, that would be great, wouldn't it?
Yeah, I would love that. Well,
I'd have to roll out the red carpet and give you some of those Southern delicacies that I love to serve up to folks.
Ooh, yes.
That sounds good. I want to thank you so much for all the great insight and this rich conversation. And Karen, we're going to have Kia on again. We're going to continue this conversation because it's ongoing, right? We're not done. But before we wrap up this conversation, I want to make sure we keep in touch and connect with Kia. So you can follow her and get more information on working with Kia and subscribe to her podcast by visiting Kia Kroom. That's KIACROOM.com, KiaKroom.com. Kia, is there anything else you want to share with our audience before we close out?
Yes, thank you for that, for telling folks how to find me. I respond to each and every one of you that reach out to me, whether you've heard the podcast, whether you've heard about me from somebody else, people all over the world. It's so encouraging, and I cherish each and every one of you. You've got the information on how to reach me. Subscribe to the Black Fundraisers podcast, wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're interested in learning more about my fundraising capacity building program for Black-led and BIPOC-led organizations, visit fundraisinginblack.org. That's www.fundraisinginblack.org. And learn how to bring this dynamic fundraising capacity building initiative to your community. You can, fill out a brief form and we'll get in touch. So I just appreciate the two of you for having me today. It's been my pleasure.
Kia, I've learned so much. Thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and insight with us today. It's been wonderful to be with you.
Thank you both.
Yeah. And thank you for listening today. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you for joining us for the Nothing But Major Gifts podcast from Veritas Group. Richard and Jeff also write an ongoing blog that you can subscribe to for free at veritasgroup.com. Please join us again next time.